Recently, this channel passed 20,000 subscribers. I figured that I should celebrate it in some form or another, so I figured why not do a Q&A session. I made a community post about it and decided to answer as many questions that came my way as I possibly could. There were so many questions that I couldn't answer every single one of them, but I've tried to answer as many as I could without answering the same question twice. So, here we go. As a preface, I mentioned in the post the only type of question I wasn't prepared to answer was specific requests for videos, although broader suggestions are fine. I will quickly address questions about a video involving Ginty and Pug, simply because I've already mentioned that I plan to make a future video featuring these characters. My original plan was to have one video starring all 7 engines that did the Sodor engine's work whilst they were away in London. Realistically, however, I'd probably make it a 2-parter. Maybe one part can involve Ginty, and Pug can appear in the second part. It's a possibility. With that, let's get into the questions. JadenView3318 asks, I don't remember if you stated it, but who is your favourite illustrator from the Railway series? I often have phases of having different favourite Railway series artists. This may become a recurring theme throughout the video, but I think if I were to pick a favourite, it probably would be John T. Kenny. I mentioned this in a previous video, but I feel like his style took a lot of appeal of the earlier C. Reginald Dalby artwork, such as visual clarity and colour usage, and combined it with a greater sense of realism, perspective and consistency between illustrations. 2. What is your favourite illustration? Well, in terms of illustrations from the Railway series books, again it's hard to pick a favourite since I haven't really thought about it before. I'm tempted to say the 5th illustration from Devil's Back, where Lord Harry, or Number 6, and the Culdifell truck are bracing themselves as they climb the mountain during the storm. You can really feel the wind and the rain in the illustration, if that makes any sense. I know some people think mountain engines is kinda extra and not really important to the grander scheme of the Railway series, but I think the book is worth existing just for that illustration, to be honest. 3. If you could illustrate new drawings for any of the books in the Railway series, which one would you pick? Well, I'd probably pick either James the Red Engine or Really Useful Engines. Both of these are the first books in the series to be illustrated by their respective artists, and it kind of shows in both cases in my opinion. I think if I were to pick one or the other, I might choose Really Useful Engines, since there's a bit more variation in terms of characters and locations. I guess the books by Stephen Lings would also be ripe for better illustrations, but they were already re-illustrated by Robin Davis, so there's not much point in having a third set done. 4. If you could own any of the TV series props, who or what would you want to own? Well, speaking realistically, I don't know how well I'd be able to take care of a Thomas prop, so I'd probably want something that's low maintenance and wouldn't end the world if it got damaged. Maybe a farm animal or something like that, or maybe the Ertl Percy from Flower Power. 5. Have you scrapped any ideas for illustrations or headcanons for your videos? I've sometimes had different ideas regarding what perspective to draw the characters from and how to frame it before changing my mind. These usually appear as part of the time-lapse, but here's a preliminary drawing of Rocket I did in preparation for the Elgate video, which I didn't use because I didn't record the process. 6. Do you have any tips for people who want to create or expand upon their own headcanons or interpretation of any of the Thomas stories? I think when it comes to headcanons, my advice would probably just be to come up with something interesting and different. It doesn't have to be super realistic, but if it's believable, then that's a plus. TTTE Van Serbia asks, Congrats, well deserved. I got 3 questions. 1. When did you first get into art/drawing? Well, I've been a fan of drawing ever since I was able to pick up a pencil, more or less. I spent much of my childhood drawing trains, cartoon characters, comic strips, or all 3 at once. I suppose I began to take it more seriously during secondary school. Unfortunately, my school didn't do A-level art because not enough students were interested, but I built a strong enough portfolio to get accepted into a college and then a university to study animation, and it was there where I got more accustomed with digital art. 2. What are your thoughts on every artist behind Wilbert's books? I think William Middleton's art style is a bit strange to look at nowadays, since we know what Edward, Gordon and Henry are supposed to look like, and his style is so different to everything that came after. I don't think I'm breaking new ground by saying that the Railway series probably wouldn't have done as well if Middleton was kept around as the main Railway series artist. I do like Reginald Payne's art style, and it's a shame that he wasn't around to illustrate more than one book in the Railway series. It was very clear that he had a good handle on drawing trains. I've made my opinions clear on Dolby in other videos, but in short I think there's a lot of appeal to his illustrations in terms of landscape and the toy-like rendering of the engines, even if the actual proportions of the engines can often get a bit janky. I've already mentioned my thoughts on John Kenny's illustrations in this video, so I mentioned that I really like Gunvor and Peter Edwards' work. Their artwork always has plenty of atmosphere, and I really admire their ability to know which details to add and which ones to omit, which is something that I often struggle with when trying to replicate their style. And I guess I've got to include Clive Spong as well, since Wilbert wrote Thomas's Christmas Party. I think his work is generally pretty good when it comes to keeping the engine's proportions consistent, as well as the locations, discounting his first book. I think my main gripe would be that his work isn't always the most atmospheric. It's difficult to put into words, but I really don't get the sense of immersion from Spong's artwork that I do from most of the other Railway series artists, although I do think he improved on this front during the last couple of books. 3. For Alexander Reginald Payne, what are your favourite illustrations that he did outside of Thomas? I do like Payne's artwork from the Boys' Book of Railways, but I've got to give a special mention to the drawing he did of the Hughes 464 tank. Gee, I wonder what could have possibly made me pick that image in particular. Evan Black 827 asks, congratulations on the milestone. I have a couple of questions. 1. What brought you back to YouTube? I see there's a significant gap between the Percy's Post music video and the first redraw challenge. Was there a specific reason for the return? I'm glad you like what I do. So the main reason I returned to YouTube after nearly 4 years was due to a number of circumstances. Before restarting my channel, I had a job with a community interest company where I ran art workshops. It was something I really enjoyed, but the programme was funded by the National Lottery, which meant that the funding only lasted for so many years, and when it ran out I had to look for work elsewhere. Trying to find work using the traditional methods is difficult enough these days, but speaking as an autistic person, job hunting just felt like I was going round in circles and not getting anywhere. I was toying with the idea of maybe restarting my YouTube channel around this time, but I started taking the idea a bit more seriously when my brother got me a drawing tablet for Christmas. I soon discovered Sketchbook, which had a time-lapse feature, and so I figured that it would be a good idea for a video series, recording myself drawing Thomas-related artwork and commentate over it. It was a format that I'd seen other YouTubers do, but nobody in the Thomas fandom was doing it to my knowledge. I figured that it was something that I'd enjoy doing, but I didn't really expect the first video in that style to blow up like it did. 2. I know you used to do trains content. Is that available for download anywhere, and are you considering going back to it? A lot of the trains models I made back around 2013 to 2020 should still be available on the trains download station, with a couple of exceptions here and there. As for whether or not I ever get back into trains modelling, it's not something I can say for certain. Back when I was pumping out 6 trains engines a year or so, the process was a lot simpler. I didn't have to worry about PBR materials or trains throwing a wobbly for undisclosed reasons. If I do get back into trains modelling, it'll probably be when I have a lot of free time. Merit Trainboy 7716 asks, 1. Which Thomas and Friends episode did you see first? I'm pretty sure the first Thomas episode I saw was Thomas and Gordon on the My Little Minivid VHS. 2. When did you get into making models and music? I think my main incentive to make trains models was simply wanting to have models of certain locomotive classes in trains and not expecting anyone else to make them. As a teenager, I happened upon a copy of O.S. Knox's Pocket Encyclopedia of British Steam Railways and Locomotives, which had a bunch of illustrations of various types of engines I'd never seen before, and I really wanted to see some of them in trains. In particular, there was a drawing of a Midland Railway flat iron, which I became briefly obsessed with. As for music, I wanted to create remixes of songs I liked, and MIDI slapping can only get you so far, especially if the MIDI itself is badly made. So I started trying out digital audio workstations like FL Studio and Mixcraft. I came across a copy of the Proteus 2 sound font pretty much by accident, and from there I made a few Thomas-style music pieces. 3. Which is your favourite drawing you've made? It's hard to say for certain, but I'd say that 3 of my favourite pieces are the drawing of Wesley from the Wellsworth and Sudbury video, the drawing of Jason from the Percy's Mainland Buddies video, and the drawing of Buck and Jumper from the Scrap Engines video. 4. Do you still have any copies of the old Thomas models for MSTS or trains? Well, the majority of old MSTS and Trains Thomas models that I made were lost to time, unfortunately. There exist some super old Trains models of Thomas and Percy I made in 2011, but they're the only ones I can find. Some other models and reskins did get released. Some MSTS reskins are available on my old Jimdo page, but that no longer exists. There was also a Trains model of Toby that I made, but it was hosted on a site that deletes files after a certain period of inactivity, so that no longer exists either. There must be someone out there who has some of these old files though, so this is a call to action. If you have any of the files in question, let me or Merit Trainboy7716 know. Either that or I'll have to make an article on the Lost Media Wiki. 5. Which is your favourite Thomas and Friends movie? My favourite Thomas movie is Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. I remember just how impressed I was with the film when I saw it for the first time a decade ago, and honestly I think I'd have preferred to see that in the cinemas as a 6-year-old than Thomas and the Magic Railroad, as nostalgic as that film is to me. 6. Can you try making a Thomas drawing that's in the style of Hasbro or any other cartoon in mind? I'm actually considering making a video, or possibly a series of videos, sometime down the line where I draw Thomas characters in the style of other famous IPs. I suppose it would be a slightly more difficult task than other art style challenges, since I'll be drawing vehicles rather than humans, but I'm sure it could be done. I can't say for certain if any Hasbro properties would be included though. 7. What other shows do you like besides Thomas and Friends? And what are your thoughts on those shows? There are a number of shows that I like, although I probably don't watch as many shows as I really ought to. Having said that, another special interest of mine is Cartoon Network shows from the 1990s and early 2000s, in particular Dexter's Laboratory and the Powerpuff Girls, since those two shows were some of the main things that got me into drawing in the first place. Whilst the characters from those shows aren't necessarily any easier to draw than, say, Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, I think the main difference is that replicating the geometric designs from the more modern cartoons of that era felt like an achievable task to 5-year-old me. Sasha Thomas 954 asks, 1. Which CGI characters are you most fond of, introduced either from the Miller or Brenner era? It's been a while since I last gave the CGI series a proper watch, so it's possible that I might have a different opinion upon a rewatch, but I seem to remember quite liking Marion the Steam Shovel back when the Brenner era was current. I think Hero's a very endearing character as well, despite his backstory not making a lot of sense. And design-wise, I'm quite fond of Stafford despite not having the most interesting personality. 2. When watching episodes that aren't based on stories by Wilbert and Christopher, which episodes do you think feel like they're almost from the Railway series but aren't? I've always thought that Double Teething Troubles could have worked as an Audrey story, both in terms of how the characters and prose are written as well as the actual plot. I think that's why it was pretty straightforward for me to reimagine Derek as a Railway series character. 3. Speaking of the latter, which characters created by Christopher Audrey do you wish would have been introduced in the TV series? I think Pip and Emma would have been a good addition to the TV series. If nothing else, I think their merchandise would have sold really well, since they look nothing like any other character and are based on a fairly iconic type of train. 4. What are your other favourite hobbies besides drawing? I quite like model trains, although I don't have a proper layout built yet. I also like collecting toy trains, although my way of collecting is slightly unconventional in that I don't like to collect everything. Invariably, I only buy and collect the toys that I think look good. For example, when it comes to the 2025 motorised Thomas range, I bought Thomas, Percy, Duck and Flying Scotsman, but not Gordon or James because I'm not a huge fan of how they look. That Blue Jay 50221 asks, 1. Do you ever plan on opening art commissions at some point? I would like to open up art commissions eventually, it's just a case of setting everything up. I'm pretty busy during this next month, so if I do open commissions, it probably won't be until November or later. 2. Do you think you'll ever do anything with characters based on the BR Standard range of locos or more BR Diesels? I think I probably will. There are definitely future video ideas that could easily involve BR Standard locomotives and diesels, but I won't spoil anything yet. PBF101 asks, Congrats! Hope your drawings and headcanons get more acknowledgement and love. My question for you is, out of all the Hit era newbies, which do you believe deserved to return the most? In my opinion, I believe it should have been Dennis. In terms of the Hit era newbies that never made it into the later seasons, generally there's not much to go off in terms of personality, so I'm pretty much only going off the designs of the characters. With that in mind, I'm tempted to say either Molly or Flora, since I quite like their designs, and I think yellow is a fairly underrated colour for steam engines. A Big Engine asks, here's some of my questions. 1. Who's your favourite character? I tend to go through phases of having different favourite characters. As a kid, I always liked the episodes with crashes in them, and Percy was often involved in these episodes, even though I'm pretty sure that Thomas had more accidents in the show overall. I think Gordon is also a pretty fun character because he's meant to be this grand, dignified engine, but also acts like a petulant child when things don't go his way. Other times I'll develop a fixation with Skarloey, or Mavis, or Arthur, or whoever. Basically, I like a lot of Thomas characters, and it's hard to pick a favourite. 2. Any merch range you like specifically? Again, I go through phases of liking different Thomas merch ranges. Ertl is probably the most nostalgic for me, but I have a lot of fond memories of Take Along as well, and Tommy and Wooden Railway are a lot of fun too. I'm rather keen on Capsule Play Rail. There's something very appealing about a toy train system that small and that expansive at the same time. 3. How much fun did you have when drawing the translated sentences? I had a lot of fun adapting the translated character bios into drawings. I'm definitely looking forward to making a part 2 to that video at some point. Rando Studio Z2X asks, I have some questions. What is your opinion on Big World Big Adventures? Well, Big World Big Adventures had a few standout episodes, mainly the ones written by Michael White, but in general I remember it being quite unfocused. It was trying to be a continuation of seasons 17 to 21, as well as the zany over-the-top brain rot cartoon that Mattel was looking for, and it didn't really work. The whole squash and stretch thing that was going on with the engines also looked pretty awful because their models are very clearly not designed to do that. Also, a lot of the international episodes felt a bit stereotypical from what I remember. It reminds me a bit of an old comic strip called Worldwide School, which featured a bunch of characters and locations from different countries and cultures in a manner that seemed well intentioned, but was a bit old fashioned even for the time. 2. Who is your favourite Thomas character? Well, I've already answered this question, so for question 3, what Thomas merchandise do you own? I'll say that I own toys and models from quite a few of the merchandise lines, although I don't have a complete collection of any of them. Not yet, anyway. Off the top of my head, I know I have some Ertl, Take Along, Take and Play, Adventures, 2025 Diecast, Wooden Railway, Brio, Motorised, Trackmaster, Playrail, Capsule Playrail, Tomy Trains, Tamika, Tomix, Bachmann, Hornby, Bandai Tex, Nakayoshi, Diapet, Diagostini, Golden Bear, and the Leonardo collection. 4. Why did you leave YouTube for a few years? I kind of already answered this question, but to reiterate, I was doing other work related to art prior to restarting this channel, and it didn't really occur to me that I could use my YouTube channel to create and post art until recently. There were some prior attempts to get my channel up and running again. In particular, I had plans to animate original Thomas stories in stop motion using toys of the characters, first with Ertl toys, and then with Capsule Playrail. The downside, as I'm sure you can imagine, is that stop motion is very time consuming, and it didn't help that I was filming multiple episodes at once. I would say I'd like to revisit these at some point, but it's easy to say that when I'm not actually doing it. I suppose that brings me to the next question. 5. Do you have skills in animating? I do have skills with animating. As well as stop motion, I've produced 2D animations for various people over the years. Again, it's quite a time consuming process, but also very rewarding. Royal Reneus asks, congrats on 20,000, such a beautiful illustration. As for questions, would you consider drawing the narrow gauge engines introduced in Season 6 onwards in the Railway series style? I'm definitely going to draw the TV series exclusive narrow gauge engines in the Railway series style at some point. The plan is to do pretty much all of the TV series characters eventually, provided they're not impossible to adapt into the Railway series. And the other question is, what is your earliest Thomas memory? For example, going to a store and buying your first Thomas item, or seeing an episode on TV, or something else entirely. Well, in terms of earliest Thomas memories, there are quite a few that spring to mind. One early memory I have is going on a camping holiday and somehow managing to puncture an airbed with an Ertl Gordon. I also recall one time we were holidaying in the Cotswolds and visited the Severn Valley Railway. I remember getting an Ertl Edward from the gift shop at Kidderminster and playing around with it at the station, only to forget to pick it up for the train ride back to the car, so we had to buy a new Edward from a toy shop on the way back to our holiday home. Marigold's Bleeding Ink asks, how did you learn to draw engines? So I've already answered questions 2 and 3, but as for question 1, it was mostly through practice. To be more specific though, it often helps to know what perspective you're drawing the engine from. There are guidelines available online if you don't fancy drawing this yourself. Then you can break down the engine into simple shapes. For example, the smokebox and boiler of a steam engine are usually shaped like cylinders, and the cab is similar to a cube, etc. It might be worth starting out with a simpler looking engine, such as Toby or a diesel engine of some description, before moving on to something more complex. ScarloianFriends.com in 5MB says, congratulations man, this is a big accomplishment. Here are my questions. 1. Would you make illustrations of Toby's brothers, and would you make some of them without cowcatchers? Well, Toby's brothers might make for an interesting video if I can do something similar to what I did in the Sodor and Mainland video, where each engine has a different visual quirk despite them all being part of the same class. Removing the cowcatchers and side plates of some of the engines would be a good place to start. 2. Who was your favourite character to draw? Well, it's hard to say for certain. I like drawing all the characters really, but I'm always interested in drawing a new engine that I haven't drawn before. And 3. What would you like to draw next? I've got plenty of ideas, but I don't want to spoil anything. Borislav Tane V1 says, I'm beyond happy for you. Hope you continue to grow your channel. 1. Do you still like doing trains content? I still occasionally boot up trains, although I'm more likely to build small routes or dioramas than model locomotives. Interestingly, I also find myself playing Trains UTC more often than Trains 2022. There's something quite comforting about the simplicity of the earlier versions of Trains, not to mention the crashes are better. 2. Sometimes you feel a bit tired of the weekly uploads. Well, not too much. There are some weeks where I've been more strapped for ideas than usual, hence why I sometimes branch out into other themes for videos, such as the videos where I fuse 2 characters together, or the Matchbox Thomas series, and so on. 3. Do you think the fandom is having a sort of renaissance? Well, I think Thomas fan content is in a much better place than it was in, say, the early 2010s. There was a time where I feel as though there was a fair amount of pushback against Thomas fan content that wasn't accurate to the classic series, or the Railway series, or Audrey's Vision, etc. And so a lot of fan material from around this time was just shot-for-shot episode remakes and the like. I'm glad now that there's a lot more variety in terms of Thomas content currently being made. 4. Are you proud of the fact that you've inspired so many people to start drawing their favourite train characters? Well, to be honest, hearing that my videos and art have inspired other people to create their own art is one of the nicest things to hear as an artist. And 5. What happened to "it's drawing time"? I like to say different phrases in different videos to keep things fresh, but no doubt I'll say "it's drawing time" again in a future video. Splendid Red Scrap Iron says, congratulations, here are my questions. 1. Given the chance, which characters' backstories would you change, and what would you change? Well, probably Hero, since he's one of the more modern steam engines in Thomas and Friends, and so his status as Sodor's first or oldest engine doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'd probably make it so that Hero has maybe experienced a lot of things in a short amount of time and is wise beyond his years. 2. Out of all the characters you've drawn so far, who do you find the hardest to draw? I think the hardest ones to draw would probably be the ones with lots of external detail and motion, so perhaps the coffee pots, since they barely even have bodies and have lots of exposed details. Once again, it's a case of knowing what details to add and which ones to omit. 3. If you had to remove one story out of the original 26 books, which one would you choose? I'm tempted to say Percy and the Trousers, since it's a Percy story in Henry's book and it doesn't really add to the book's overall arc, and Audrey could have used the freed up space to expand upon the other stories in the book. Island of Sodor Films 8712 asks, 1. Have you ever watched Tugs? I have watched Tugs, although it's been a while since I last watched it in full, so I probably ought to give it a rewatch at some point. 2. Thoughts on Tom and Jerry? I've always really liked Tom and Jerry. I don't think it's a hot take to say that I much prefer the original 1940s and 50s shorts compared to the later instalments. And 3. Will you draw characters from the cancelled movie The Adventures of Thomas in the style of the Railway series? Well, that might make for an interesting video further down the line. Hippie Chick 95 asks, congratulations, seeing that most of the questions on this post seem to be more fandom related, I'll ask something more about art in general. What do you have the most fun with in the process of creating? For example, the planning stage, the brainstorming, seeing the finished piece. What's the most satisfying part for you? Well, I think for me, the most satisfying part of the process is seeing everything come together for the finished piece, especially if I'm trying out a new art style or experimenting with new brushes and colour palettes. Splendid Studio says, congratulations, you totally deserve it. Now here are my questions. Do you plan to show off your Thomas collection? Do you still own some of your Thomas toys from childhood? If so, which ones? And have you got a favourite Thomas character? Well, I've already answered question 3, but as for question 1, I've been thinking of maybe doing videos where I look at pieces of Thomas merchandise in my collection, similar to a couple of videos I did back in the day, albeit with better production values. For a while I've been considering maybe doing merchandise videos themed around a specific character, with a sort of retrospective-y discussion about each toy in the video one by one. Many of which would be from my childhood, particularly a lot of the old Ertl trains in my collection. Let me know if anyone's interested. I think toy discussion videos that complement the What If merchandise videos might be interesting to do as well. For example, I could do a Matchbox Trains retrospective to complement the Matchbox Thomas videos I've been making, and if I make, say, a Power Trains Thomas video, then I could make a video where I discuss the actual Power Trains toys, and so on. Wardhouse TV says, Question 1. At some point, could you try CGI or even All Engines Go characters in the Railway Series style? Well, I've done a couple of CGI characters in the Railway Series style, and I'll get round to making more of them eventually. Same with All Engines Go characters. 2. If you have a favourite drawing or character backstory, either original or putting TV series engines in the Railway Series style, what or who is it and why? It's hard to say for certain, but I think my favourite character backstory might be the one I made for the Mine engine, aka Duchess. I think I managed to create a backstory that is a little out of the ordinary, while still fitting in quite well with the pre-established Sodor lore. And 3. Would you possibly consider making your own full-on Railway Series continuation book with your illustrations on the titular engines? Well, I've been thinking about making Railway Series style books or audio stories with new illustrations to match, although due to the sheer number of illustrations I need to do, as well as writing a new set of stories, it'll probably be something I'll have to gradually work on in between my regular video outputs. I've got a lot on my plate during this next month, so I probably won't be able to make a start until around November or later, but I'll still definitely want to do it at some point. Harvey Rivers asks, 1. Favourite and least favourite eras of the franchise? I suppose my favourite era of the franchise would be the classic era of seasons 1 to 7, but that's maybe a bit too broad since it spans about 20 years. I think you could probably split the classic era into 3 sub-eras, seasons 1 to 2, 3 to 5 and 6 to 7, in which case I'd probably pick seasons 3 to 5. Some of the best episodes with the best aesthetics and set design came out of this era, and the merchandise was extremely varied and interesting during this period as well. As for least favourite era, it's a toss-up between the Nitrogen era and the Big World Big Adventures era, although the Nitrogen era at least had good merchandise and marketing, whereas Big World was pretty bad all round. 3. A bit of a random one, but what are your thoughts on Postman Pat and Fireman Sam, specifically the 80s and 90s version? So I've already answered question 2, but as for question 3, I have a lot of fondness for the classic 80s and 90s versions of these shows. They certainly make for great comfort viewing when I'm feeling nostalgic. Liam George Z4N asks, are you planning to draw more fictional engines and vehicles in the Thomas style, like you did with the figurine engines and Ivor? I think I probably will do more videos in that vein. There are characters like Sammy the Shunter and Chuffalong that I think would be interesting to convert into Thomas characters. Same with the cast of shows like Underground Ernie and Chuggington. Another type of video that I was maybe thinking of doing if people were interested is maybe a video where I take a talking train franchise and maybe just draw my interpretations of the characters if I was in charge of said franchise, rather than specifically redesigning them into Thomas characters. So for example, if I were in charge of Mighty Express, here's how I design the characters and so on. And he also asks, what video on your channel are you most embarrassed about? I suppose a lot of my content from before around 2015 or 16 I'm not super big on, although some of my very early stuff like Thomas the Montage Engine I can at least look back on and laugh. I think some of my very early music on the channel from like 2012 or so is pretty naff since I didn't really know what I was doing. The third question is, what are your thoughts on the Big World Big Adventures era of the show, and would you say it's worse than All Engines Go? I've already mentioned my overall thoughts on Big World Big Adventures, and I've never really watched All Engines Go. I think what I can say is that whereas Big World felt very unfocused, All Engines Go at least knows what it wants to do. It's just that what it wants to do is not something that appeals to me. And finally, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Thomas and the Magic Railroad Director's Cut? I'm definitely looking forward to seeing and hearing more about the Director's Cut. I think the most shocking revelation I've heard recently about Magic Railroad is that apparently Oliver was going to be in it. Kid me would have loved to see that. Trainboy Z111 asks, do you have any other interests besides Thomas, and do you have any other hobbies? Well, I suppose I could give one answer to both questions. Another big interest of mine is creating comic strips and cartoon drawings using my original characters. Several of these characters are witches, and so I generally draw them during October as part of the Witchtober challenge, so I look forward to that in a few days. Apologies for the shameless plug, but you can find my non-Thomas artwork at Trouble and Toil on Blue Sky and at Trouble and Also Toil on Instagram. Links in the description. Funny Roblox Train asks, 1. What is your favourite and least favourite drawing you have drawn? I've already mentioned my favourite drawings, but I think one that could do with the most improvements is the splatter and dodge drawing from the Magic Railroad video, since I feel that I rushed that drawing somewhat to meet a deadline. Would you draw Ernest the Engine Car characters in the Thomas style like what you did with Ivor the Engine and Elgate Engine figures? An Ernest the Engine Car video is definitely a maybe. I can't say for certain if I'll do it, but never say never. And 3. Could we make models of your characters in other forms of media, like trains or 3D printed Trackmaster shells with your permission? I'd definitely be interested in seeing my characters in different forms of media, so I'd say go right ahead. Fancy Engine 2516 says, congrats on getting to 20,000 subscribers, hopefully 30,000 isn't too far off. 1. Do you like other vehicle shows like Bob the Builder and Chuggington? Well, Bob the Builder is another show I enjoyed whilst growing up, particularly the earlier seasons. I've somehow never watched Chuggington, so maybe that's another show to put on my to-watch list. And 2. What are your thoughts on Slippy Sodor? Well, I always hated the fact that a barrel of bubble liquid didn't have a lid on it. I know realism wasn't a strong point of this era of writing, but that's got to be a record. I think the idea of the Fat Controller and Mr. Bubbles chasing after Thomas in a car and getting into wacky situations is a fun concept. I just wish it had been done in a better episode. SKR1952 asks, will you remaster some of your old YouTube videos, like Thomas the Paint Engine, or revive your old OCs and incorporate them into your Thomas lore, like Marty the number 1/2 engine? Your old content is a true goldmine of content, please don't let it go to waste. I'm thinking I could maybe redraw scenes and OCs from my old videos. That would make for some interesting nostalgia. I haven't thought about many of those old videos for many years. Aquasprite says, congratulations, I absolutely adore your videos, and seeing you reach that milestone is just amazing. My question, do you have any tips on drawing engines? I've been wanting to draw some of my engine OCs in specific scenarios, but I'm struggling to figure out the best way to make sure my proportions are right. Well, I've already spoken about this a little bit, but I suppose another tip to add is that if you're drawing digitally, don't be afraid to select parts of the drawing that don't look correct and resize, skew or just redraw them from scratch. It's something that I do frequently with my own drawings, sometimes even after I've started colouring them. Mafal Damau, I apologise if I've gotten that name wrong, asks, My 3 questions are: 1. Are you going to do audio stories? Well, as I've mentioned, I've had some plans for audio stories with new illustrations, but I can't say for certain when they'll get done. 2. If you are, will they be about the characters in your headcanon, i.e. the engines in your videos that you make backstories for, or existing stories? So my current ideas for audio stories focus largely on the characters I've created or reinvented for my videos, as well as how they interact with the already established engines on Sodor. 3. And lastly, can I write certain stories for you if they're about engines in your headcanon? I've done 4 stories already. Sure, that's fine by me. It's always interesting to see and hear fan content involving the characters I've helped to create. And so, there were a bunch of questions answered, and the finished picture of course. Again, I apologise that I wasn't able to answer every single question. There was just so many. If I can find the time, I might go back to the comments of the community post and answer some more questions directly. But thank you to everyone who contributed. The fact that so many people are interested in what I do means the world to me. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next week for another video.